Occupied France, August 1943. The sun hung high over the airfield, pouring heat into the tarmac until the air shimmered like water. The base was quiet, the kind of heavy quiet that comes before something important. At precisely 1400 hours, a runner crossed the control yard, searching for Oberleutnant Werner Schultz, Chief Technical Officer of Jagdgeschwader 26. The news he carried should have been a triumph. An American Thunderbolt had been forced down, intact. The pilot was already in custody. The machine, battered but not destroyed, sat on German soil like a captured animal, wings drooping, canopy fractured, but still whole. To German intelligence, this was gold. For months, Luftwaffe pilots had radioed bewildered reports. This American fighter is impossible. Too fast, too high, too strong. Stories filtered back of Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts pouring cannon fire into this ungainly brute, only to watch it limp home, smoke trailing, still defiant. Now, finally, the engineers would see with their own eyes what this monster was made of. When Schultz reached the tarmac, his first impression matched every German pilot's. The aircraft looked grotesque. A bloated fuselage, round as a milk bottle, perched on squat landing gear. Its nose seemed swollen beyond proportion, its wings stubby and thick. Compared to the clean, predatory lines of a Bf-109, the American machine looked almost comical. Pilots had named it the Fliegende Milchflasche, the flying milk bottle. Looking at it now, Schultz understood. It did not look like it belonged to the sky. It looked like something dragged from a factory floor and forced to grow wings. But Schultz was not a pilot. He was an engineer, and engineers do not trust appearances. "Ugly doesn't matter," he muttered to himself, notebook already in hand. "Ugly can still kill." Schultz began where any engineer would, with the heart. His team unbolted the cowling. Metal plates screeched as they were pulled away, revealing the engine within. For a long moment, the men stood silent. The engine seemed to fill the fuselage like a beating heart, too large for its chest. Pratt and Whitney R2800 double Wasp, 18 cylinders in 2 rows of 9. A double-row radial, massive even by American standards. Schultz's pencil paused above his notebook. 18 cylinders, displacement, massive, estimated output, at least 2,000 horsepower. The number alone chilled him. The BMW 801, the pride of Germany's radial design, gave 1,700 horsepower at best, straining to reach those figures, coughing in high-altitude air. And that engine was already stretched to the breaking point of metallurgy and resources. Here was an engine that surpassed it by 20–30%, an aircraft power plant that Germany could not match even on paper. He leaned closer. His assistant pointed, eyes wide. "Herr Oberleutnant, look here, the cylinders, each one removable, replaceable individually." Schultz froze. He traced the mounts with his fingers. It was true. A mechanic could swap a single damaged cylinder without tearing the engine apart. Brilliance, pure brilliance, faster repairs, less downtime, more fighters back in the air. German mechanics, by contrast, wrestled with engines that demanded full disassembly for major work. Time wasted, planes grounded, pilots left waiting. In war, time is fuel, time is survival. And this American engine had been designed to save both. What stunned him most was not just power, it was quality. He searched for the telltale signs of compromise, substituted alloys, rough machine work, corners cut to save scarce resources. He found none. The cylinders were uniform, perfectly balanced. Bearings gleamed. The crankshaft was a sculpture of steel. Every component spoke of precision machining, tolerances so fine that German factories, under Allied bombing and material shortages, could barely dream of matching them. This engine had not been built to survive shortages. It had been built the right way. And then Schultz saw the true revelation. A tangle of ducting snaking aft through the fuselage led to a turbine buried deep in the rear. He followed the lines with his finger, his mind already calculating pressures, temperatures, revolutions. The turbo supercharger. He had heard rumors. Now he saw it with his own eyes. A system that captured the exhaust gases, spinning a turbine at 20,000 revolutions per minute, feeding compressed air back into the engine. A cycle of power, reclaiming what was waste, turning it into speed. Schultz exhaled slowly. The engineering was staggering. Heat-resistant alloys in the ducting, bearings capable of enduring hellish stress, calibration so delicate that a single flaw could tear the system apart. Germany had tried to build such systems. They had failed. Metallurgy cracked, bearings shattered. Factories lacked the skill, the precision, the material. Yet here it was, inside a fighter that had been mass-produced. Not a prototype, not an experimental curiosity, a production machine, one of hundreds, soon to be thousands. He scribbled calculations furiously. With this turbo supercharger, the Thunderbolt's 2,000 horsepower heart could breathe freely at altitudes where German engines suffocated. At 25,000 feet, a Bf-109 gasped, its mechanical supercharger straining. At 25,000 feet, this P-47 would be hitting its stride. He underlined the numbers 3 times. Above the bomber streams, where the Reich's fate would be decided, the Americans had built a predator Germany could not touch. "Can we replicate this?" one of his assistants asked quietly. Schultz shook his head, slowly, heavily. "Not with our factories, not with our steel, not with our shortages." The words felt like betrayal, even as he spoke them, but they were truth. This system demanded high-grade alloys by the ton, demanded precision machining by skilled hands Germany was already running out of, demanded man-hours that the Reich could not spare, not under the rain of Allied bombs. Replication was not impossible in theory, but theory is worthless when factories lie in ruins. And Schultz, a man who trusted numbers, saw the truth in every line of his notebook. Germany could not match this engine, not today, not ever in time. The revelation was not just technical, it was existential. The P-47 was not grotesque, it was not crude, it was not the milk bottle, it was prophecy. Every bolt, every cylinder, every inch of alloy whispered the same truth. The United States was fighting a war Germany could not hope to win. Not a war of tactics, not even of pilots, but of industry. And the P-47 was the proof, gleaming on the tarmac in the French sun. The heart had stunned them. But now, it was time to look at the body. The mechanics circled the P-47 like surgeons around a patient. Panels were unscrewed, plates pried open, wires, hoses, hydraulic lines, all exposed under the August sun. What they saw forced them to abandon prejudice. First came the skin. German aircraft, Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulfs, were built lean, elegant, efficient. Weight was trimmed wherever possible, armor was minimized, panels were thin. The American machine was different. Its fuselage panels were thick, heavy gauge aluminum. The rivets sat deep and plentiful. There was no sense of elegance here. It was brute force design, almost agricultural in its bluntness. One engineer ran his hand along the metal and muttered, "This is a tank with wings." And he wasn't far from the truth. The cockpit told the same story. They pried open the canopy, still cracked from the forced landing, and peered inside. The seat rested in a bathtub of armor plating. Steel surrounded the pilot on all sides, front, back, underneath. Even the glass was thicker than anything in German fighters, layers of laminated panes designed to deflect rifle rounds and fragments. To the Germans, it was shocking. Their pilots flew in cockpits where a single burst could rip through like paper. Here, the American pilot sat in a fortress. Heavy? Yes. Inelegant? Certainly. But survivable. And survival, Schultz knew, was victory extended by minutes, by hours, by missions flown again tomorrow. Then came the wings, wide, thick, ugly to a designer's eye, but inside, secrets. The spars were massive, built to absorb punishment. Hydraulic lines doubled, sometimes tripled. Control cables ran with redundancy. A single cannon hit might sever one, but the others kept the wing alive. The engineers compared it to the FW-190, their pride. The Focke-Wulf was agile, its wings light, its design efficient. But efficiency comes with fragility. The Thunderbolt was not efficient, it was defiant. Schultz scribbled a line in his notebook. This aircraft refuses to die. Damage reports from the front suddenly made sense. Pilots of Jagdgeschwader 26 had sworn they poured cannon fire into these brutes, only to watch them limp away trailing smoke. They had joked that you needed an 88mm gun, the same weapon used on tanks, to bring one down. Looking inside the structure now, Schultz realized it was no joke, it was fact. The Thunderbolt was an airborne tank, and every design choice screamed that survival mattered more than elegance. Next came the guns. 8 of them. 8 50-caliber Browning M2 machine guns, 4 in each wing, aligned in deadly symmetry. The Germans measured barrels, checked ammunition belts, weighed boxes. Each gun spat bullets at 850 meters per second. Each carried hundreds of rounds. Together, the 8 unleashed a storm of lead so dense that a single burst could shred a bomber's wing or tear apart a fighter foolish enough to linger in its sights. Schultz thought of the Bf-109 with its 2 machine guns and a single 20mm cannon. Precise? Yes. Deadly? Yes. But compared to this hurricane, it felt almost polite. Americans, one engineer muttered, shaking his head. They don't fire bullets, they fire walls. The landing gear surprised them next. German fighters used narrow-track gear, delicate struts designed for paved runways and careful handling. Pilots cursed them, especially on rough fields where one mistake sent planes cartwheeling. The P-47's gear was wide, strong, thick like the legs of a workhorse, designed for muddy fields, improvised strips, quick turnarounds. It meant fewer accidents, fewer crashes on takeoff, more planes available for combat. Another margin, another advantage. The more they saw, the more a picture formed. This aircraft was not built for beauty. It was not built for maneuver duels at 300 meters. It was built to survive flak, to absorb punishment, to climb high, dive fast, strike hard, and come home again. It was an industrial philosophy made flesh. Schultz closed his notebook and looked at the machine one last time. It weighed nearly twice as much as a Messerschmitt. It climbed slower. It turned wider. It was clumsy on the ground. But in the sky at high altitudes, with its turbocharger breathing, it became something terrifying. A beast too heavy to swat down, too powerful to outrun, too armed to ignore. For years, German propaganda had mocked it as the Fliegende Milchflasche, the flying milk bottle. Now, staring into its armored cockpit and thick wings, Schultz realized the cruelest truth of all. The milk bottle was a fortress, and fortresses win wars. The engineers had seen enough metal. Now they turned to paper. On Schultz's desk in the requisition hut lay stacks of combat reports collected for months from Jagdgeschwader pilots along the Channel front. At the time, the reports had seemed exaggerated, even hysterical. Now, with the captured P-47 sitting outside like a silent witness, every line rang true. One report, dated May 1943, attacked a Thunderbolt formation at 22,000 feet, struck one aircraft with multiple cannon bursts, observed heavy smoke, expected it to fall. Instead, the machine continued level flight, climbed again, and disappeared west. Ammunition expended, no result. The pilot had signed his name reluctantly, as though ashamed to admit failure. Schultz read it twice, then looked out the window at the captured plane. The thick armor, the bathtub cockpit, the redundant lines, it all explained the mystery. What had once sounded like excuses now sounded like engineering. Another report, June 1943. Engaged Thunderbolt diving out of sun, opened fire at close range. Strikes observed on wing root and fuselage. American aircraft rolled inverted, dove away at extraordinary speed. Pursuit impossible. Here, too, the logic was clear. The P-47's dive speed was legendary. Its sheer weight gave it momentum that lighter German fighters could not match. Where a Bf-109 risked structural failure past 450 miles per hour, the Thunderbolt dove past 500, even 550, screaming down like a hammer from the sky. Pilots called it unfair. Schultz called it physics. Then a third report, written in frustration: "We cannot climb with them above 25,000 feet, turbocharged. They retain power where we lose it. To fight them is to bleed slowly until fuel is gone." This one stung the most. The Luftwaffe had once ruled the heights. At 20,000 feet in 1940, the Bf-109E had been untouchable. Even the vaunted Spitfire had struggled. Now, only 3 years later, the Reich's best fighters suffocated in air, where the Thunderbolt thrived. Altitude had switched sides. The engineers began compiling comparisons. Bf-109G, maximum horsepower, 1475. FW-190A, maximum horsepower, 1700. P-47D, as tested, 2000, sometimes more, with war emergency power. Climb rate, German superior below 20,000 feet. But above that, the Americans surged ahead. Dive speed, Thunderbolt unmatched. Survivability, Thunderbolt superior by orders of magnitude. Armament, 850 calibers, against 2 machine guns and a single 20mm cannon. Each line was a blade, each comparison another cut. "Could we match it if given time?" one assistant asked quietly, almost fearfully. Schultz tapped the page with his pencil. "Our 109 is nearing the limits of its design. Each new variant adds weight, adds drag. Gains are smaller and smaller. The Focke-Wulf is better, stronger, but even it cannot climb with this beast at altitude, and neither can dive with it." He sighed, a sound older than his years. "To match it, we would need a new fighter entirely, a new engine, a new philosophy, and we have no time for any of it." The pencil stopped moving. The silence in the hut was heavier than flak. It wasn't just the airplanes, it was the industry behind them. The Americans were producing P-47s by the thousands, factories in Farmingdale, Evansville, Long Island humming night and day, their output dwarfing anything German plants could achieve under bombs and shortages. Each Thunderbolt cost more aluminum, more steel, more man-hours than a German fighter. Yet the Americans built them faster. Quantity was its own quality. What use was a brilliant Bf-109 design if only a few hundred rolled out, while thousands of Thunderbolts darkened the skies? Schultz closed his eyes, recalling his visit months earlier to the Messerschmitt works at Regensburg. Bombed roofs, shattered machines, workers exhausted, frightened, aluminum shipments delayed by submarine losses. Then he pictured what he had read of American factories: vast assembly lines, rivers of raw material, engines produced in hundreds each week. It was not a contest of pilots anymore. It was a contest of economies. And Germany's economy was bleeding to death. One engineer tried optimism. "We have the Me-262. The jet will change everything." Schultz shook his head. "The jet is still fragile, still rare. We have a few dozen, they have thousands. And jets cannot be everywhere. Meanwhile, these monsters escort bombers every day." He tapped the combat reports again. "Even if the jet succeeds, it is already too late to stop what is coming." The reports continued. One pilot wrote bitterly, "It is not a duel. It is harassment. They dive from above, strike, and leave before we can respond. They choose the fight, not us." Another wrote with despair, "Our cannons strike them. They do not fall. I am empty before they are broken." Reading them with the captured P-47 outside, Schultz felt the full weight of truth. The Luftwaffe was bleeding not just men, but belief. When pilots no longer trusted their weapons to kill, morale cracked. When engineers no longer trusted their factories to match, strategy cracked. And cracks become collapse. He turned the last page of the last report and let it fall. Outside, the American fighter gleamed in the sun, battered but unbroken. It had been shot down once, by chance, by luck, by a dozen factors colliding. But it had taken punishment no German fighter could endure, and it had fallen whole enough to study, whole enough to still inspire dread in the men who examined it. It was proof made of metal, proof that the Reich could not catch up. Schultz walked back onto the runway and stood before the Thunderbolt's massive radial once more. The war was already written here, in steel and aluminum. Germany could keep fighting, could keep producing, could keep hoping for miracle weapons. But miracles do not multiply by the thousands. Factories do. And this ugly American machine, this so-called milk bottle, was more than a fighter. It was the industrial will of an entire nation, distilled into one unstoppable shape. Schultz closed his notebook for the last time. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "we cannot match this. Not now, not ever in time." The words carried no drama, no flourish. They were just truth, and truth in war is fatal. By autumn 1943, the truth could no longer be hidden. Germany had not lost the air war in a single battle. It had lost it in thousands of sorties, in the endless tide of machines like the Thunderbolt. Every report Schultz read, every panel unbolted from the captured P-47, pointed toward the same conclusion. The Luftwaffe was outflown not because of courage, but because of numbers and endurance, and those numbers belonged to America. The Reich had built its air defense like a wall. At the bottom, bricks were flak batteries, lined along rail yards, cities, and factories. Above them, the mortar was Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, interceptors scrambling to tear bomber streams apart before they reached their targets. For a time, the wall held. In 1942 and early 1943, American bombers bled heavily. Daylight raids cost squadrons dozens of aircraft. Fighter groups paid in men with each mission. But the wall had cracks, and through those cracks, the Thunderbolt forced its way. At 25,000 feet, where bombers lumbered and German engines choked, the P-47 soared. Its turbocharger roared, its massive radial refused to quit. Escorting B-17s and B-24s deeper and deeper into the Reich, Thunderbolts became the hammer that broke the Luftwaffe's back. German pilots once dove with confidence, their cannons shattering unescorted bombers. Now they looked up and saw milk bottles in formation, glinting silver in the sun, waiting to dive on them instead. The hunter had become hunted. The scale was merciless. By late 1943, Republic Aviation's factories in Farmingdale and Evansville were turning out P-47s faster than German plants could replace losses. 1 month alone, March 1944, saw over 600 Thunderbolts roll off American lines. That was nearly the entire output of Messerschmitt fighters in the same period. And Germany's production was under bombs. Each raid shattered tools, slowed machines, burned stocks of precious alloy. Factories could be repaired, but time could not. And time was the one thing the Reich no longer had. Schultz, staring at his captured machine, understood this instinctively. Even if Germany copied the R-2800 engine tomorrow, they could not build enough. Even if they solved the metallurgy of the turbocharger, they could not equip every squadron. Even if they poured every hour into new prototypes, they could not fill the skies faster than America already was. America fought with industry as its sword, and the P-47 was the blow that industry delivered. The pilots of Jagdgeschwader 26 felt it in their bones. Where once they attacked bomber streams and returned with victories, now they returned with losses. Where once they hunted in packs, now they were scattered by 8-gun storms. Where once they trusted that altitude favored them, now they gasped while Thunderbolts still climbed. A war of confidence turned into a war of despair. The statistics were brutal. By the end of 1944, American escort fighters had torn apart the Luftwaffe's backbone. Hundreds of aces were gone, burned out, killed, or captured. Training schools, starved of fuel and aircraft, sent up boys barely capable of landing. And overhead, Thunderbolts still patrolled, their wide wings and heavy fuselages blotting out the German dream of air superiority. Every new German prototype, Ta-152, Me-262, arrived too late, too few, too fragile. The war in the skies had already been decided by machines like the one Schultz studied on that French runway. Strategically, the consequence was catastrophic. Without air cover, German armies marched blind. Without fuel convoys intact, tanks sat useless. Without factories safe, production starved. The P-47 was not just a fighter, it was the shield that made the Allied bomber offensive possible. And the bomber offensive was the hammer that smashed Germany's ability to fight. No fortress is impregnable when the sky itself turns against it. By 1945, the once proud Luftwaffe was a shadow. Squadrons that had once claimed dominance over Europe now scattered in panic at the sight of silver formations. Fighter Command still issued orders. But orders mean nothing when there are no engines, no fuel, no pilots to obey them. The Reich's wall had fallen. It had not fallen to genius weapons or miracle jets. It had fallen to industry, mass, and relentless attrition. And at the heart of that attrition stood the P-47 Thunderbolt, the ungainly milk bottle that would not die. Looking back, historians often argue about which fighter won the air war. Some say the Mustang, with its longer range. Others point to the Spitfire, the Hurricane, the FW-190. But in the dark months of 1943, when the question was still in doubt, it was the Thunderbolt that carried the burden. It was the Thunderbolt that escorted bombers when Mustangs were still scarce. It was the Thunderbolt that proved American engines could not be matched. It was the Thunderbolt that filled German reports with despair. The milk bottle broke the Reich. For Schultz and his engineers, the captured P-47 was not simply an aircraft. It was prophecy written in steel. They could disassemble it, measure it, calculate it, curse it, but they could not stop what it represented. It was not just an enemy fighter. It was an enemy economy, an enemy industry, an enemy future that Germany could not outrun. Every bolt whispered the same truth. The war was already lost. In the years after, survivors would recall their shock, their grudging respect, even their hatred of the machine. But beneath all that lay recognition. The P-47 was proof that victory does not always wear elegance. Sometimes victory wears bulk, redundancy, armor, and raw horsepower. Sometimes victory looks like a milk bottle. And that truth, realized too late, was the final verdict on the Luftwaffe's dreams.